What is up, everyone? It's Quinn here, and in today's video, I'm going to be going through the top draft strategy if you are picking in the early first round, so the 101 through the 104. I'm going to be talking about the targets you should be looking to draft in the first few rounds, making sure you're starting off your drafts on a positive note. And then I'm going to be going through 4 different mocks, one from each pick. So the 101, the 102, the 103, and the 104, just kind of showing you the overall teams you can build from these early first round picks. I do think this is probably my favorite pocket to pick from. A little bit lower on the 103 and the 104 as I might have been a few days ago, but I still think the 101 and the 102 are the 2 best picks you guys can have in fantasy this year. So if you enjoyed the video, hit the like button, subscribe. Questions, comments, feel free to drop them down below. We'll try to get back to you as soon as I can. But let's start off by looking at the targets in round 1. So I'm going to have 3 different rows here. It's going to be the buy, hold, and sell. Buy, obviously, I think these are really solid picks, solid values. Hold, I'm fine with the pick. And then sell, just guys I'm not really considering in this spot. So you can see the players here, the number at the top left, that's their ADP. So the consensus ADP, not my personal rankings. You can see the 3 players in the buy tier, that is Jahmyr Gibbs, Bijan Robinson, and Jamar Chase. I completely agree with the order of these players. Gibbs is my 101, Bijan is my 102, and Chase is my 103. Now I do have Puka as my 104. I just don't think you're getting much value here. And I do think there's kind of a mini tier break after the 103, just because there's still some like looming suspension risk here with Puka. So if I was sitting there at the 104, I mean, I'd love if I could draft Bijan or Chase. It's probably unlikely, and so I'm totally fine taking Puka there. I think you could have made a case for CMC if he wasn't actively injured right now, because that just adds so much risk. There is kind of some like 2024 vibes with his training camp. And then JSN also just not a player I'm considering here. So if you have the 101 or the 102, you can lock down one of these top 2 running backs. If you have the 103 or the 104, I think you're starting strong with one of the top 2 wide receivers. Now looking at the 2-3 turn range, we'll start off in the back end of the second. So the 209, 210, 211, and 212. I think the buys here, guys that aren't necessarily always slipping here according to consensus ADP, but if you can get Kenneth Walker, A.J. Brown in the back third of the second round, I think that's a huge win. This is also a spot where I really like hitting up the tight end position, getting one of these, top 2 tight ends in Trey McBride or Brock Bowers. I do prefer Brock Bowers, but I'm cool with either of these guys in the back end of the second. I think they are both some solid buys. And then in the hold tier, I'm going to have Nico Collins. Neighbors is kind of just going a little bit later according to consensus ADP, but I'd also kind of have Neighbors in this hold tier. I have him as a back end round 2 value. And then in the sell tier, I have Josh Allen, George Pickens, and Jeremiah Love. I'm sure I'll talk about this more when I go through the mocks. I'm really waiting at the quarterback position this year. I'm not trying to force it. And to me, taking a 2-3 turn Josh Allen is 100% forcing it. There's just such solid depth this year. There's some solid later round values. This is just not even close to where I'd consider taking Allen. I think the earliest I'd consider drafting him is the 3-4 turn, which obviously not attainable with an early round 1 pick. George Pickens, I like him early round 3. I'm just not loving him at the back end of the second. And then Jeremiah Love, he was a player who I was totally willing to take in this range prior to the high ankle sprain. You can see as we're getting into round 3, I currently have him as a hold in the early 3rd round. This is still kind of, timeline dependent. If it looks like he's going to be trending towards playing week 1, then I'm fine taking him in the early 3rd. But the idea of drafting a running back who could miss the first few games and then maybe be limited, that's pretty underwhelming in the 2-3 turn area, especially when there's already some kind of uncertainty with him being a rookie. Cardinals offense not necessarily projected to be awesome. So now looking at the round 3 options, obviously you have some of the similar names because this is the turn. I talked about Pickens as a sell in round 2. I think once you're getting to early round 3, I do think he's a solid buy. Nico Collins also going to remain a buy. And then I also really like Malik Neighbors in this range. I think early round 3, you're typically going to be looking at the wide receiver position. As I mentioned, I have Jeremiah Love as a hold here, and then still selling Josh Allen at this ADP. Rashee Rice, Chris Olave, I don't necessarily think they're super overvalued, but not huge fans of them in the early third, maybe more mid third, and then also selling Kyron Williams here. I will say I would have had Breece Hall in the hold tier. Consensus ADP, he's actually going a little bit lower than this. But now with the potential groin injury, now that's also making him a little bit sketchy. I do think I drafted him in one of the mocks before we found out about the groin injury. So those are the early targets I'm looking at. I think you can start off with some really solid combinations. If you have the 101 or the 102, you can go with your hero RB with Bijan or Gibbs. You can get a potential high-end tight end 1 with Bowers or McBride. You're also going to have some interesting wide receiver options available, guys like Nico Collins, George Pickens, Malik Neighbors. Those are guys that are going to go in that range. The reason why I'm a little bit more sketched out about the 103 and the 104 is that you can kind of get phased out of the running back position. Now, if you go 104 Puka, there's certainly a chance you could get a guy like Kenneth Walker or maybe one of these running backs to slip to you, but it's also possible you kind of get locked out of the running back position, especially if Jeremiah Love's outlook isn't looking great, because he was the one target you could really bank on being there in the 2-3 turn area. And I don't like the idea of having 0 RBs through the first 3 rounds. Now, as we're going to see in some of the mocks, I do think there are some interesting options at the 4-5 turn that you could look at running back, but still you're kind of banking on some of those guys slipping. If you're in an RB hungry room, like all of a sudden you could be in a really rough spot at the position. But I do think there's some interesting starts from this pick or these picks. Now let's just dive into the mock drafts here. So starting off from the 101, I have Jahmyr Gibbs as my best player available. I'll also throw it out there. PPR scoring, 2 running backs, 2 wide receivers, a tight end, 2 flex spots, and then 5 bench slots. So Jahmyr Gibbs is my personal 101. I have the 101. He is obviously the pick here. Then the 2-3 turn, the tight ends are off the board. We don't have a falling Kenneth Walker or an A.J. Brown. So I'm just going best player available once again. And at this spot, it's back-to-back wide receivers. I don't think we're getting any sort of crazy faller, but Malik Neighbors, George Pickens, 3 rounds in, RB1 Jahmyr Gibbs, top 2 wide receivers, Malik Neighbors, George Pickens. I think that's a really solid start through 3 rounds. Then the 4-5 turn, I go 1 wide receiver, 1 running back. I get Jalen Waddle and DeAndre Swift. This has been a range in previous years where I'm not really looking at the running back position. I didn't necessarily love the options available. I really like DeAndre Swift in this 4-5 turn range. He was a high-end running back 1 last year. I think the situation's probably only gotten better. He was legitimately good from a real-life perspective, and so getting him as my RB2 in round 5, I just think is a really solid pick. And then I know Waddle has the injury issues, but I like the move to the Broncos. I think he has a much higher ceiling. When healthy, he's a super talented player, so getting him to be my wide receiver 3, I think is pretty interesting. Then the 6-7 turn, 2 guys that I think are just a little bit undervalued, especially on Sleeper, Jadarian Price and Parker Washington. It's kind of interesting because from a dynasty perspective, a rookie draft perspective, I was pretty low on Jadarian Price. I didn't think he was, worthy as a prospect of going in round 1. But in redraft, if I can get him like late round 6 with the pretty clear runway he has in front of him to be my running back 3, I do think that's just a no-brainer pick. And then Parker Washington, at this point, he's my favorite to be the Jags wide receiver 1. He's been getting a ton of positive reports out of camp. Obviously, the end of last year, he really broke out, was super productive. To be the wide receiver 4, I feel very good about him there. I mentioned it talking about Josh Allen, about how I'm really interested in waiting at the quarterback position. I think there are a few different pockets where you can get some of these fallers. And I don't even know if Purdy's like a crazy faller, but I do have him in that tier with Herbert and Trevor Lawrence. And so we get to this 8-9 turn area. I wasn't sure if I was going to like the options in the 10-11 range. And so I get QB1, I get tight end one. We go Brock Purdy, Travis Kelce back to back. I do think in terms of later round tight ends, Travis Kelce is a totally solid pick. Obviously, he's nowhere near his prime, but the weapons on this Chiefs offense are pretty underwhelming. I still think he has a little bit of juice left. And then for Brock Purdy, I think he's a better rusher than people give him credit for. The weapons, it's kind of, a little bit sketchy. A lot of guys with some injury concerns, some older players, but he's been able to weather some of the injuries around him in this Shanahan system. He has just consistently produced. And I do think on pretty much every platform, Brock Purdy is being underdrafted. And he is one of those guys where in certain pockets, the tier above it, it's like a Caleb Williams or a Jalen Hurts. If they start to slip, I think they're interesting. I think if Purdy or Lawrence or Herbert start to slip, I think those guys are also solid options. And then we close it out the last 4 rounds. Xavier Worthy, Rashad White, Dejon Stribling, who kind of similarly to Jadarian Price, I hated the pick when it happened. I was not high on him from a dynasty rookie perspective, but some of the injuries in this wide receiver room, he's gotten good reports out of camp. At some point, you got to believe the hype a little bit. And I'm paying a late round 12 price, so it's not anything crazy. And then the last guy here, Keaton Mitchell. So this was definitely, more heavy running back wide receiver. We don't get quarterback or tight end until the 8-9 turn. And so the running back room, I think, is solid. Jahmyr Gibbs, obviously my favorite to be RB1. DeAndre Swift, a really solid number 2 option. I think Jadarian Price, a nice running back 3. Pretty strong wide receiver room. I mean, we spend 3 of our first 4 picks at that position. Malik Neighbors, George Pickens, Jalen Waddle. Really like Parker Washington as a wide receiver 4. And then just kind of taking some flyers and good offenses with Xavier Worthy and Dejon Stribling. So that's my mock from the 101. Now looking at the 102, once again going to the running back position. My number 1, Jahmyr Gibbs, is off the board. At the 102, we go with Bijan Robinson. Then this was a spot where we get one of those falling tight ends. And especially because I have at least one running back on lock here, I feel comfortable taking a tight end in this spot. So Trey McBride at the 211. And then early round 3, you see Rashee Rice, Neighbors go at the 2-3 turn. Pickens, A.J. Brown went before Trey McBride. My best player available is Nico Collins. And 3 picks, 3 different positions. I think Bijan, McBride, obviously really solid opportunities to be number 1 overall at their positions. Nico Collins has just been a super reliable mid-tier wide receiver 1. Then getting into the late round 4 range, this is a player who I have drafted very little of, and some people might view this as a crazy value. Personally, I don't. This is about where I have him ranked. Javonte Williams at the 411. This is a spot where if he's going to fall here, I have my concerns about the receiving, some of the peak upside, but he's going to have a lot of rushing volume in a good offense, a lot of touchdown upside, 411, very reasonable price for that type of profile. And then got to get another wide receiver here. So round 5, I go with Terry McLaurin. I think McLaurin's interesting. You're kind of getting a discount because he was banged up last year, had the holdout, seemingly wasn't fully ready going into the season, but this is still a pretty open group of weapons. They add Stephon Diggs, but outside of that, there's not a ton going on. If Jane Daniels can stay healthy, which we'll see we're kind of banking on with our next pick, I think Terry could definitely be solid like he was in 2024. Then we're getting into the 6-7 turn, and this is one of those pockets where I just want to take advantage of falling value. Jaden Daniels falls here to the 6-11. I think he is in that tier with Lamar Jackson, Drake May, Joe Burrow. And so if I can get him potentially a round and a half later, almost 2 rounds here for May, I think he's a really solid pick back end of round 6, has a lot of rushing upside. We have the stack here with Terry. Yes, there are injury concerns. He has a slight frame. He takes a lot of hits, but the upside is also there with Jaden Daniels. So back end of round 6, I'm totally cool taking that risk. And then moving into round 7, want to continue to add to the wide receiver room. Typically don't love only 3 wideouts through 7 rounds. Metcalf's not necessarily someone who I'm super high on, but in this range, I think he is a totally fine pick. I don't think his ceiling is very high, but I think you trust him to be a serviceable, like fringe wide receiver to play. He's kind of mixed in with some of these younger guys. I would have probably gone Jordan Tyson if he wasn't banged up, but he does have some of those injury concerns. And in a build where we're kind of thinner on wide receiver, would also prefer someone just like that immediate production that we get out of DK Metcalf. I'm going to draft my running back 3 with Jonathan Brooks. He's a player who I've been very high on, and that was before Chuba Hubbard got banged up. Even more of a runway for Jonathan Brooks to kind of take over and lead this backfield. So him as our RB3, feel very good about that. Talented player when he is healthy. Then we go back-to-back wide receivers, Josh Downs and Casey Concepcion. Josh Downs, one of my, easily favorite picks this offseason. I think the just overall offensive environment, he's in a really good spot to earn a lot of routes. And throughout his career, when he has been on the field, he has been productive. He has been efficient. Alec Pierce banged up, Michael Pittman gone. Pretty clear to see how Josh Downs could deliver a really solid season. And then Casey Concepcion, I just really liked him as a prospect. I think solid round 1 pick. Obviously, the offensive situation is kind of sketchy, but we've seen these talented rookies can break out and make a big impact, especially down the stretch. He's my wide receiver 5. I don't need him to produce immediately. Also, on the back end of that turn, we go Chris Rodriguez. I really like Bashal Tutin, but I think C-Rod is someone who has some sort of handcuff value and could be a desperate play, even in a committee with Tutin. And then the last 2 picks, I actually go Dejon Stribling again. When you're getting into like the 12th, 11th round or 12th, 13th round, there's not a ton of interesting wide receiver options. He is the guy that kind of consistently stands out. And then the final player here, Jonah Coleman, really like him as a late round running back pick. So this is a very balanced team. We have a lot of high upside players at 3 positions. Jaden Daniels at quarterback has upside to be QB1. Bijan at running back has upside to be RB1. And then Trey McBride has upside to be the tight end 1 overall. Definitely think we're struggling a little bit at wide receiver. Nico Collins, Terry McLaurin, DK Metcalf, Josh Downs, Casey Concepcion, Dejon Stribling. It's not the cleanest room, but I do think it kind of gets elevated and will get helped out at the other 3 spots. So this was a spot where I went kind of earlier tight end, early-ish quarterback. Some players I'm not drafting a ton of, but I do think this turned out pretty well. Then the next pick here, the 103. I think this is where this draft slot starts to get a little bit sketchy when you're not guaranteed a running back. And so at the 103, I go best player available. That was Jamar Chase. 210, once again going best player available. It is Brock Bowers. And then round 3, Malik Neighbors. I don't love not having a running back through 3. But with that being said, I mean, these top 3 picks, I think, are just all studs. Jamar Chase, Brock Bowers, Malik Neighbors, all super high ceiling players, all extremely talented. I don't hate any of those individual picks. In fact, I really like the values on all 3 of those guys. I guess the Chase pick is, kind of the standard, but I'm much higher on Bowers, also a little bit higher on Malik Neighbors. Then when we're getting into the back end of round 4, early round 5, this is kind of where we need to lock in at the running back position. This is a spot where I've been fine taking running backs. When you get to the 6-7 turn, for me, it's been Jadarian Price or bust. And so I don't really want to go into that range banking on Price being there. He actually did end up being available, but once again, there was no certainty of that. So I go Cam Scatabo at the 410. This was between Scatabo and ETN. I'm sure people are going to have differing opinions. I slightly lean Scatabo. Last time I checked, they're like literally back-to-back in my rankings. And then my guy DeAndre Swift is here at the 503. So another share of Swift in this video. I think we did pretty well, 0 running backs through round 3, getting Scatabo and Swift to be our top 2 running backs. I feel like we recovered pretty well at that position. We get back to wide receiver in rounds 6 and 7. We go Christian Watson, Parker Washington. These are kind of the overall targets I'm looking at in this range. Really like Parker Washington, like I mentioned. You have some of these younger wide receivers, BTJ, Jordan Tyson. I am just kind of leaning Christian Watson in this range. Maybe he doesn't have the same ceiling, but I think he's more reliable, more established. Back end of round 8, don't want to completely forget about the running back position, so I go Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt. Has an opportunity to lead the Commanders' backfield, so RB3, fair. This is where I take a faller at the quarterback position. I think Trevor Lawrence is in that tier with a guy like Justin Herbert, who goes in round 8. We get Trevor Lawrence early round 9. He was an absolute monster down the stretch last season. I think a full season now with Liam Cohen under his belt, I think he could have a huge year too with Cohen, and also stacked with Parker Washington is kind of interesting. The 10-11 turn, we go Jordan Mason, a solid running back 4. Since we didn't, stack it early at the running back position, want to get a couple more names who could at least fill in with an injury or a bye week. I think JCM and Jordan Mason fit the bill there. Xavier Worthy again at the wide receiver position, and then Denzel Boston, Marshawn Lloyd. Marshawn Lloyd, really interesting late round running back pick, kind of a natural handcuff to Josh Jacobs, but with Jacobs' legal situation also being banged up, like there's a real chance Marshawn Lloyd is starting multiple games this season. And obviously every handcuff has that upside, but you're just banking on an injury. In this situation, you have suspension upside and you have just like injury lingering upside. So definitely could be some ins there for Marshawn Lloyd. He also just needs to stay on the field because he's really struggled early on in his NFL career. So to overview this team, Trevor Lawrence at the quarterback position, Scadaboo Swift at the starting running back spots, Jamar Chase, Malik Neighbors, Brock Bowers, Christian Watson, Parker Washington. I feel like that's a pretty solid starting lineup. And then I think our bench is interesting. JCM, Jordan Mason, Xavier Worthy, Denzel Boston, Marshawn Lloyd. Don't necessarily feel great about Boston, but if he can produce early, maybe we keep him around. If not, kind of churn the waiver wire. He has gotten some good reports out of camp. I was definitely much higher on Concepcion as a prospect, but maybe he makes an impact early on in the season, or at least shows some flashes that we hold on to him here. But now let's move into the 4th and final mock draft from the 104, and we'll start it off here with Puka Nacua. I do think Nacua is the first pick where you're like, maybe you could go somewhere else. Maybe it was CMC if he wasn't injured. Maybe you're a JSN guy. Personally, I'm not really. So I'm fine going Puka here, even though it doesn't feel amazing. Now, this is a spot where you can get a little bit stuck. Say, Kenneth Walker goes in front of A.J. Brown, or instead of A.J. Brown, or instead of Trey McBride. And then I'm sitting here with potentially no running backs through 3 rounds. But Kenneth Walker ends up falling to the 209, which I think is a fantastic value. I view Kenneth Walker as an early round 2 pick. So getting him at the 209, great value. I do go Breece Hall here, and I mentioned this earlier on. This was before the groin injury. Could be nothing, could be something. Obviously, if this is threatening him playing in week 1, then this certainly would have been a different pick here. Could have been a wide receiver, could have been a running back. Actually, probably not a running back in this spot. But assuming Breece is good to go, kind of an interesting double hero RB start here from a pick where there's no guarantee that's going to be available for you. I'm starting to really like Colston Loveland in round 4. I think he has a lot of upside. I'm pretty high on this Bears passing attack. And so getting him 409, I think is pretty interesting. If I'm not getting McBride, Bowers, or Loveland, typically I'm just waiting and going later round tight end, unless there's some sort of extreme faller with a Fannin or a Pitts, guys like that. Then we kind of get serious about the wide receiver position. Another Terry McLaurin share in this video. I go Carnell Tate 609. I go Marvin Harrison 704. Admittedly, I don't really love this back-to-back here. I'm not a huge Marv guy. He did kind of just seem like best player available, although I don't love it. Carnell Tate, I think, is interesting, but this could be a sketchy start to the season where maybe Tate isn't super productive. Maybe Marvin Harrison just isn't putting it together in year 3. So do have some concerns at wide receiver. I go Jonathan Brooks as a really solid RB3 in the 8th round. I feel much more confident about Josh Downs at the wide receiver position, and then Rashad White in round 10. Go late round quarterback with Kyler Murray in round 11. I like Kyler. If you're getting past that tier with like Purdy and Herbert and Lawrence, when you're getting into the Goffs and like the Nixes, the Loves, guys like that. I do like Kyler. I think in a good offensive situation, good weapons with his rushing upside, I do think he could way outperform his current ADP. And then the last two picks, Denzel Boston and Keaton Mitchell. So looking at this team, I think we feel really good about the running backs, Kenneth Walker, Breece Hall, really nice 1-2 punch. Jonathan Brooks as the number 3, Rashad White as a really solid number 4. Quarterback, in terms of late round picks, I feel good about Kyler. Puka, obviously a great wide receiver 1. Loveland, solid tight end. Like I mentioned, wide receiver, a little bit sketchy. I think Terry's a fine number 2. Tate and Marv, once again, maybe a little bit iffy in the wide receiver 3 spot, but I do like Josh Downs where we got him, and then Denzel Boston. Already talked about him. But that is pretty much going to wrap it up for this video. I talked through some of those early targets, took a look at 4 different mock drafts. Overall, I do like early round 1 picks, especially the 101 and the 102. Also cool at the 103. 104 could definitely swing either way. If you get some interesting fallers, it could certainly pan out well. If not, you could kind of get painted in a little bit of a corner. But overall, those are my thoughts on these early round picks. Would love to hear your thoughts down below in the comments. If you enjoyed the video, hit the like button, subscribe. Also, stay tuned for the mid-round picks and late round picks coming out over the next few days. But thank you all for stopping by, and I'll see you in the next one.